The beginning of something unexpected. Soft hum of the airplane filled the air, blending with the quiet chatter of passengers and the distant clinking of cups. From the flight attendant's cart, KeanuReeves sat by the window, gazing out into the vast stretch of clouds. His eyes, calm yet distant, reflected years of silence, loss, and quiet strength. It wasn't the fame that had aged him, it was everything that came before it. The people he lost, the love that never returned, the pain that turned him into the kind man the world admired but rarely understood. Next to him sat Sandra Bullock. She was reading a travel book, pretending to focus, though her mind was somewhere else. This trip wasn't about movies or interviews. It was personal. For both of them, the world saw them as stars, but today they were just a people on a long flight, trying to find peace in motion. As the plane ascended higher, Sandra closed the book and sighed softly. Keanu turned to her and smiled the way he always did, gentle, understated, but sincere. "You okay?" he asked. "Just tired," she said. "It's been a long few weeks." "Yeah," he replied. "I get that." For a while, they didn't talk. Silence wasn't awkward between them. It was familiar. Ever since their first film together years ago, they had shared that rare bond, the kind that didn't need constant words to be understood. The turbulence began lightly, and Sandra shifted closer. She didn't say anything, but Keanu noticed. He knew she hated turbulence. Without thinking, he rested his arm slightly on the armrest between them, just enough for her to feel comforted, not crowded. "It's okay," he said quietly. "We'll be fine." She nodded, her eyes softening. Minutes passed. Her breathing slowed, and soon, her head gently tilted to the side, resting against his shoulder. Keanu froze for a second, not out of discomfort, but because of the quiet tenderness of the moment. The world outside was nothing but clouds and golden light, but in that small corner of the plane, time felt still. He could feel her warmth, the soft rhythm of her breath, and something inside him shifted. He wasn't used to letting people this close anymore, not since he'd learned how fragile peace could be. He looked down at her. There was no makeup, no cameras, no script. Just Sandra, peaceful, tired, human. And for the first time in a long while, he smiled to himself. A real one. The flight attendant came by and slowed her steps, recognizing him instantly. She smiled but didn't say anything. There was something sacred about the scene, something that shouldn't be interrupted. Keanu adjusted slightly so her head could rest more comfortably. She stirred, murmuring softly, "Sorry, don't be." He whispered, "Sleep. You need it." She didn't answer, but her hand, almost unconsciously, brushed against his arm. It was brief, but enough to make his heart skip a beat, a strange reaction for a man so used to solitude. The hum of the engine filled the silence between them. Keanu turned back toward the window. Outside, the sky looked endless, like the world had paused just for them. He thought of all the times he had flown alone, countless nights, countless destinations, always with the same emptiness beside him. And now this, a simple, unexpected moment that somehow made everything feel different. Hours later, the plane began its descent. Sandra woke up slowly, blinking, disoriented. When she realized where her head had been, her eyes widened a little. "Oh no," she said softly. "I fell asleep on you." He chuckled, his voice calm. "Yeah, I noticed." She blushed slightly, brushing her hair back. "Sorry, that's embarrassing." "Not at all," he said. "You were tired." She smiled faintly. "Still, that's not how I imagined our reunion after years." He raised an eyebrow. "You imagined it?" She laughed quietly. "Maybe. In a different setting, though. Something more glamorous, less drool on the shoulder kind of moment." Keanu grinned. "For what it's worth, you didn't drool." "Thank God," she said, mock sighing. "Small victories." They both laughed, but behind the laughter was something heavier, something unspoken. Years had passed since they last worked together, but it didn't feel like it. The chemistry, the comfort, the quiet understanding, it was all still there. As the plane touched down, Keanu looked at her and asked, "You nervous about being back?" She looked out the window, then nodded. "A little. It's strange going back to where it all began. Everything's changed, but somehow, I haven't." He understood. Sometimes going back is the only way to move forward. She turned to him, surprised by the depth of his words. Keanu had always been like that, saying something simple that carried 100 meanings. As the plane taxied to the gate, the world outside felt busy again, filled with noise and flashes of life. But inside that cabin, a quiet story had begun, one that neither of them expected. When they stepped out, the airport lights flickered across their faces. Sandra pulled her bag close, brushing past a group of fans who had already recognized Keanu. Cameras started flashing, voices calling his name, but he didn't look away from her. "You ready for this?" he asked. She smirked. "Never." "Then let's go anyway," he said softly. They walked together through the chaos, and though they were just traveling, something had changed between them. Something unspoken had been set in motion, gentle, real, and dangerous in the way all true connections are. And somewhere deep down, both of them knew this was only the beginning. The journey that changed everything. The hotel lobby was quiet that night, filled with the distant sound of rain tapping against the glass walls. Sandra stood near the reception desk, waiting for the staff to find her booking. Keanu was beside her, hands in his pockets, calm as ever. Their flight had been delayed, and by the time they arrived in Tokyo, the world outside had turned silver with rain. "One room left," she repeated, her voice mixed with disbelief and exhaustion. The young receptionist bowed slightly. "Yes, Miss Bullock. Unfortunately, our system shows only one suite available tonight. The rest are fully booked due to the conference." Keanu turned to her, trying not to laugh. "Looks like the universe has a sense of humor." She gave him a look. "Don't you dare say it." "Say what?" he asked, feigning innocence. "That we can share it. Because that's exactly the kind of situation that gets turned into rumors." He smiled faintly. "Then we make it simple. I'll sleep on the couch." She hesitated. Her body was aching from travel, her head heavy from jet lag. Finally, she sighed. "Fine. But I'm not responsible for any paparazzi headlines tomorrow." He chuckled softly. "Deal." They followed the bellboy through the quiet hallway. The suite was beautiful, large windows, soft lighting, a touch of old Tokyo charm mixed with modern calm. Sandra dropped her bag and collapsed onto the bed. "I'm never flying economy again," she muttered. "We didn't," Keanu said, amused. "Well, it felt like it," she groaned. He smiled, walking toward the window. Outside, neon lights glowed through the mist. "It's strange," he said quietly, "how cities never sleep, yet we still feel so alone in them." She turned to look at him. "You say things like that, and suddenly the room feels like a movie scene." He shrugged. "Maybe it is. Maybe we just don't know the script yet." She stared at him for a moment, lost in thought. Keanu had always been like that, his words simple, but they carried weight. Every time he spoke, it was as if he'd lived 1,000 lives before saying a single sentence. Later that night, they sat on the balcony, sharing tea and stories. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the city lights reflected in their eyes like stars on water. "Remember our first movie together?" Sandra asked. "Of course," he said. "I remember thinking you were fearless." She laughed. "I wasn't. I was terrified half the time. But you were calm. Too calm, actually. I thought you were bored." "Never," he said, smiling. "I just didn't know how to talk much back then." "You still don't," she teased gently. He grinned. "That's fair." Silence settled between them again. Not uncomfortable, just deep. The kind that comes only when two people understand each other, without needing to fill the air with words. After a long pause, Sandra asked softly, "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if we had stayed closer all these years?" He looked down at his hands, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes," he said. "But maybe we weren't supposed to. Maybe we had to go live our own stories first before this one could happen." She nodded slowly. "You always sound like you've already made peace with everything." He looked at her, his eyes quiet but honest. "Not everything. Just the things I can't change." She felt that, deep inside, because she, too, had spent years trying to make peace with the things she couldn't fix, relationships that faded, friends lost to time, and the pressure of always having to smile when her heart wasn't ready to. The next morning, the world outside was golden again. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and Sandra woke to the sound of someone making tea. Keanu stood by the kitchenette, hair slightly messy, wearing a simple black t-shirt. You make tea like it's a ritual, she said, her voice still soft from sleep. He smiled without turning. It kind of is. Helps me start the day right. You mean in silence and reflection? She teased. He handed her a cup. Something like that. As they sat together, she noticed how easy everything felt. No rush, no pretending. Just being. Later that day, they were invited to a private charity dinner hosted by local filmmakers. Cameras flashed as they walked in, side by side. The crowd whispered, surprised to see them together again. One reporter asked, "Are you two working on a new movie?" Before Sandra could answer, Keanu smiled slightly and said, "No, just traveling friends." His tone was kind, but his eyes told a different story, something unspoken, something that even Sandra felt but couldn't name. Throughout the evening, they were inseparable. He held doors open for her, listened when she spoke, and never once treated her like the spotlight she carried. To him, she wasn't a celebrity. She was just Sandra. But not everyone in the room saw it that way. As the night went on, a familiar face approached her ex, a director she hadn't seen in years. His smile was sharp, his tone smooth as glass. "Well, look who it is," he said. Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, the internet's favorite fantasy reunion. Sandra froze slightly, her smile tight. "Hello, Mark." Keanu's gaze shifted calmly. "Nice to meet you." Mark smirked. "You're always playing the hero, huh? Does it ever get tiring pretending to be perfect?" Keanu didn't flinch. His voice stayed calm. "Perfection doesn't exist, but respect does." The air grew tense. Sandra's hand trembled slightly on her glass, and Keanu noticed. He gently touched her elbow, guiding her away before things could escalate. Outside the hall, she exhaled shakily. "Thank you. For what?" he asked. "For not making a scene." He smiled faintly. "You've had enough people trying to turn your piece into a performance." She looked at him for a long moment, and in that gaze, something shifted again. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of something neither of them had words for. As they walked back to the hotel later, the city lights reflected in puddles on the street. Sandra's heels clicked softly against the pavement. "You didn't have to defend me," she said. He shook his head. "I didn't. I just wanted to make sure you remembered that you never have to fight alone anymore." Her eyes softened. "You always say the right thing at the right time." "No," he said quietly. "I just say what's true." The rain began again, gentle and slow. Sandra stopped under the awning, watching the drops fall. Keanu stepped closer, holding out his hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's walk." "In the rain?" she asked, half laughing. "Yeah," he said. Some moments shouldn't be wasted hiding. So they walked to figures under a gray sky, surrounded by the hum of the city, laughter mixing with raindrops. And though they were just traveling friends, the world around them seemed to know something. They did in single quotes. Something was changing. Quietly, beautifully, and without either of them realizing it yet. When hearts begin to remember morning after the rain was clear and bright, as if the sky itself had decided to start over. Sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains, warm and gentle. Keanu sat on the balcony, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the quiet rhythm of the street below. People rushed by with umbrellas still in hand, unaware that somewhere above them, people were unknowingly stepping into a new chapter of their lives. Sandra joined him a few minutes later, wrapped in a soft robe. Her hair was messy, and her voice still held the weight of sleep. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, eyes still on the city. "The world feels different after rain. You always notice things like that," she said softly. "Tiny things most people overlook." He turned to her, smiling faintly. "Sometimes the tiny things are the only ones that last." She didn't reply, but the words stayed with her. There was something about the way he spoke, quiet but full of meaning, that made her heart feel heavier and lighter at the same time. Later that day, they were invited to a small charity event at a children's hospital. Keanu had been donating there for years in secret, never wanting publicity. Sandra agreed to come along, not as a star, but as his companion in kindness. The hospital was filled with laughter, drawings, and walls covered in colors. Children ran around with bright eyes, some in wheelchairs, others with four poles, all smiling like they carried the sun inside them. Sandra knelt beside a little girl with no hair and asked her what she was drawing. A superhero. The girl said proudly. He saves people but doesn't tell anyone. Keanu knelt beside them, his eyes soft. That's a good kind of hero, he said. The girl smiled. He looks like you. For a moment, the room went quiet. Sandra watched Keanu's expression shift, gentle, humble, touched. Later, as they were leaving, Sandra said quietly, "You didn't tell me you'd do this." "It's not about telling," he said simply. "It's about showing up." She nodded slowly, understanding him more with every passing hour. KeanuReeves wasn't a man of grand speeches or loud gestures. He healed people by presence alone. And though she didn't realize it yet, he was slowly healing her too. That night, they went for dinner in a quiet corner restaurant. No paparazzi, no noise, just dim lights, warm food, and soft music playing from an old radio. "You ever think about slowing down?" she asked suddenly. "I have," he said. "But slowing down means sitting with everything you've avoided. And that's harder than moving fast." She leaned back in her chair. "So what do you do when life slows you down anyway?" He thought for a moment, then said, "You breathe, and you hope the silence doesn't scare you anymore." She looked at him across the table, and for the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not as a celebrity, not as an actress, but as a person who had been trying too hard to stay strong. As they walked back through the streets of Tokyo, lights glowed above them, and the air smelled of rain and jasmine. Sandra spoke softly. "You know, people think we have everything. Money, fame, success. But they forget what it costs." Keanu nodded. "Peace. It costs peace." They stopped at a crosswalk, the red light reflecting in their eyes. For a moment, neither moved. "I used to think being strong meant never breaking," she said quietly. "But maybe strength is knowing when to stop pretending you're fine." He turned to her. "Maybe strength is letting someone see you when you're not." The light turned green, but neither of them stepped forward right away. The world moved around them, and they just stood there, two souls caught between motion and stillness. When they finally reached the hotel, Sandra hesitated outside her room. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For today. For being you." He smiled faintly. "You make it sound like a rare thing." "It is," she whispered. She started to open her door, but before going in, she turned back. "Keanu, yeah, do you ever get tired of being alone?" He paused. "Sometimes. But loneliness can be peaceful too. It's the noise of fake company that hurts more." Her eyes softened. "You really mean that?" He nodded. "Yeah. But tonight didn't feel lonely." She smiled quietly, then stepped inside. Once the door closed, Keanu stood there for a long time, his thoughts louder than the silence. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the hospital, about the laughter of children, about the girl who said he was her superhero, and about Sandra, the way she looked when she laughed, the way her eyes softened when she listened, the way her presence didn't demand anything but gave everything. He sat by the window, watching the city lights blur into the horizon. Somewhere deep down, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. Not for fame, not for success, but for connection. Across the hall, Sandra couldn't sleep either. She kept thinking about the way he looked at people, the way he listened, and how, somehow, she felt safer beside him than she had in years. The next morning, they were scheduled to visit a film set on the outskirts of the city. It was supposed to be casual, a friendly reunion with an old director. But fate had other plans. As they arrived, Sandra spotted a crowd of reporters waiting outside. Flashes went off the second they stepped out of the car. Microphones extended, voices shouting questions about their relationship, their romantic trip, and even rumors of an engagement that didn't exist. Keanu gently placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Ignore them," but she couldn't. It was too much, too loud, too invasive. By the time they reached the entrance, her hands were trembling. Inside, she took a deep breath and said, "I can't do this again, Keanu. I can't let them twist everything." He looked at her quietly. "Then don't fight them. Live your truth louder." She frowned. "What if they don't believe it?" "Then they were never meant to," he said softly. His calmness was like a lighthouse in the storm. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she realized why people called him the kindest man in Hollywood. It wasn't because he smiled more. It was because he carried pain differently. He turned it into peace. As the cameras outside kept flashing, Keanu stepped slightly closer and said in a low voice, "Let them see this, then." Before she could ask what he meant, he took her hand. Not in a dramatic, staged way. Not for the cameras. Just simple, steady, human. And for the first time, Sandra didn't pull away. The crowd gasped, lights flickered, and questions grew louder. But for both of them, it all faded into background noise. Inside that brief, fragile moment, the world didn't matter. Only the warmth of his hand did. And somewhere between friendship and something deeper, they both began to remember what it felt like to truly feel again. When the heart forgets how to pretend, the next few days passed in a strange blur. What started as a quiet trip had now become a storm of headlines and speculations. Every morning, Sandra's phone buzzed with messages, agents, journalists, friends she hadn't spoken to in years, all asking the same thing: "Are you and Keanu together?" She stopped answering after a while. Every reply only made things worse. Keanu, on the other hand, seemed untouched by it all. He went on morning walks, smiled at strangers, took photos with fans politely, and never once mentioned the chaos online. But Sandra couldn't. She wasn't built that way. The noise got to her. The pressure, the gossip, the twisting of something pure into something marketable. It reminded her of everything she had tried to leave behind years ago. The fame that took more than it gave. The loneliness that came wrapped in applause. That evening, she found him on the rooftop terrace, sitting alone with a cup of tea. The city lights flickered below like a sea of restless souls. "You're good at pretending nothing bothers you," she said quietly. He didn't turn right away. "It's not pretending," he said softly. "I just choose where to spend my peace," she sighed, stepping closer. "You make it sound easy. It's not," he said. "But I've learned that reacting gives power to the wrong things." She sat beside him, silent for a while. The wind brushed through her hair, carrying the faint scent of rain. "They think we're a story," she said. "A romance, a rumor, something to sell. Let them think what they want," he said calmly. "Truth doesn't need to shout." She looked at him, searching for something in his eyes. A hint of irritation, a spark of defiance, anything human. But all she saw was kindness. Steady, grounded, almost frustratingly calm. "How do you do that?" she whispered. "Stay so centered when the world keeps trying to pull you apart." He smiled faintly. "Because I already broke once. Now I just know which pieces are worth keeping." His words hit her deeper than he knew. She turned away, her throat tightening. For a moment, she didn't want to be an actress or a name on a headline, or a woman who smiled for everyone but herself. She just wanted to feel safe. And somehow, sitting next to him, she did. Later that night, a soft knock echoed at his door. When Keanu opened it, Sandra stood there, barefoot, eyes uncertain. "Can we talk?" she asked. He nodded, stepping aside. She sat on the couch, pulling her knees close. "I read one of the articles," she said quietly. "They said I'm using you to stay relevant." Keanu stayed silent. "It shouldn't hurt," she continued, her voice shaking. "But it does, because I've spent years trying to be known for my work, not my mistakes. And now, after everything, I feel like I'm right back where I started." He walked over and sat across from her, calm but firm. "You're not what they write, Sandra. You never were." She looked at him, eyes wet. "Then what am I?" "You're someone who still cares. That's why it hurts." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the room. Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to carry it all alone," he said. "I'm not good at letting people in," she admitted. "Then start small," he said gently. "You can let me in." Her lips trembled. "And what if I do?" He smiled faintly. "Then I'll stay." She looked down, her heartbeat uneven. "You shouldn't make promises like that." "I don't make promises," he said softly. "I make choices." That night, they didn't talk much after that. But something shifted again. A new quiet filled the space. Not loneliness, but something that felt dangerously close to love. The next day, they were scheduled for a charity gala. Cameras again, lights again. This time, Sandra almost didn't go. But Keanu convinced her. "Not for them," he said. "For the cause, and for yourself." She reluctantly agreed. She wore a simple black dress, elegant, not flashy, and walked beside him. Their steps perfectly in sync. The gala was full of faces from the past. Actors, directors, and journalists who once knew their every move. At first, everything went smoothly. Polite conversations, light laughter, glasses clinking. Until she saw him, her ex, Mark, again, standing by the bar, drink in hand. That same smug smile on his face. He approached, pretending surprise. Sandra, Keanu. What a pleasant coincidence. Keanu offered a polite nod. But Sandra's smile was strained. Mark leaned closer. I read the news. Seems you finally found your perfect image fix. Reeves, the saint of Hollywood. Mark, not now, Sandra said under her breath. But Mark wasn't done. You always had a thing for men who make you look better. Keanu's eyes lifted, calm but sharp. That's enough, Mark laughed. Relax, I'm just saying the truth. Everyone plays a role, even you, Reeves. The tragic good guy. The mystery man. Tell me, how much of it is real? For the first time that night, Keanu's composure wavered. Just slightly. But instead of answering, he did something that silenced the room. He took Sandra's hand, gently but with purpose, and he looked Mark straight in the eye. Real enough to know when to protect someone who deserves peace, he said quietly. The entire room fell into stunned silence. Mark stepped back, speechless. And in that pause, something powerful happened. People stopped whispering. The flash of cameras slowed. And for the first time in years, Sandra Bullock wasn't standing in the shadow of gossip. She was standing beside a man who saw her for exactly who she was. Later that night, when they left the gala, she didn't say anything. Not until they reached the quiet of the car. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I know. He replied. Then why did you? He looked out the window, his voice calm. Because I'm tired of watching good people get broken by bad noise. She stared at him for a long time, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. You make it really hard not to care about you. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's okay. The car drove through the glowing streets of Tokyo, rain misting the glass again. In the reflection, their faces looked almost like strangers, but the kind of strangers who had somehow found their way back to something real. And when the car stopped outside the hotel, Sandra didn't move right away. She just looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. What if they're right? About what? About us. He met her gaze, steady and warm. Then maybe this is the one time they're not wrong. And as she sat there in silence, her heart finally stopped pretending she didn't feel something deeper. Something that scared her more than fame ever could. The night the world saw their truth, the rain had stopped by morning, but the air still carried its scent, clean, sharp, and heavy with memory. The headlines had changed overnight. Every newspaper, every website, every talk show was buzzing with one story. KeanuReeves defends Sandra Bullock in front of her ex. At the Tokyo Gala. Sandra sat by the window of her hotel room, scrolling through endless photos and clips. In every shot, Keanu's hand was gently holding hers. In every angle, his calmness stood like a shield. And yet, behind all the noise, she saw something else, the truth of the moment. He hadn't done it for the cameras. He'd done it for her. A soft knock broke her thoughts. She turned and found Keanu standing in the doorway, dressed in a black jacket. His expression unreadable. You've seen the news, he said quietly. Everywhere, she replied. They're calling it the moment the internet melted. He smiled faintly. You okay? She hesitated. I don't know. Part of me feels grateful, and another part feels scared. Scared of what? Of how real it felt, she said softly. That moment at the gala, when you held my hand. It wasn't acting, was it? He looked at her, eyes deep and kind. No, it wasn't. Silence filled the room. Not the awkward kind, just the heavy kind that comes when do people realize something they can't unfeel. She exhaled slowly. Then what happens now? Whatever we choose, he said. She smiled faintly. You make it sound simple. It can be, he said gently. If we stop running from what's real. That day, they were supposed to return to Los Angeles. Fans were already waiting at the airport, holding signs, phones in the air, cameras flashing. The noise was deafening. As they walked through the terminal, Sandra tried to keep her head down. But one reporter shouted a question that froze her in place. "Sandra, are you in love with Keanu?" The crowd went silent for a second. Even the airport seemed to pause. Sandra looked up, eyes wide, unsure what to say. Before she could answer, Keanu stepped forward. His voice calm but strong. "Respect her privacy," he said. "Love isn't a headline." The crowd stirred. Cameras flashing again, louder this time. Sandra's heart pounded. Not from fear, but from the simple truth of his words. Love wasn't a headline. It was what he just did. Once again protecting her, not with fame, but with grace. They boarded the plane in silence. The seats were the same as before, side by side, window to aisle. She looked at him, her expression soft. "You keep saving me," she whispered. He turned to her. "No, Sandra. I just keep showing up. You're the one saving yourself." The plane took off, and the clouds swallowed the noise of the world below. Sandra leaned back, eyes closing. When she opened them again, the cabin lights were dimmed, and Keanu was quietly reading. She smiled to herself. The same peace she felt when she first fell asleep on his shoulder returned. But now it was something more, deeper, unspoken. Midway through the flight, she spoke softly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you ever marry again?" He looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "Because sometimes when you've lost too much, you stop believing you can build again. And sometimes you're just waiting for someone who doesn't see you as a name, but as a man trying to be whole." She nodded slowly, her chest tightening. "And if that person came along?" He turned to her, his gaze holding hers. "Then I'd never let her feel alone again." The silence that followed said everything words couldn't. When the plane landed, flashes greeted them once again. This time, Sandra didn't hide behind her sunglasses. She walked beside him, close enough for the world to see, but calm enough to show it wasn't for show. A week later, they attended a quiet event in Los Angeles. No red carpet, no press. It was a fundraiser for children's mental health. The organizers asked them to speak about compassion and resilience. When Sandra took the stage, she spoke from the heart. "We live in a world that loves noise," she said. "But the most powerful moments in life are the quiet ones, when someone sits beside you, listens, and stays. I've learned recently that kindness isn't loud. It's steady. And sometimes, it looks like someone simply showing up when you need them most." Her eyes found Keanu in the crowd. He smiled, proud and peaceful. After the event, they slipped out to a small garden behind the hall. Fairy lights hung from the trees, casting a soft glow over them. "You spoke beautifully," he said. "I just said what I felt," she replied. "That's rare," he said softly. "Most people say what sounds good." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I've learned from you." They stood there for a while, listening to the wind through the leaves. Then, almost without thinking, she said, "Keanu, do you ever wonder if some people are meant to find each other twice in one lifetime?" He turned toward her, his voice low. "Maybe it's not twice. Maybe we just needed time to grow into who we were meant to be for each other." Her eyes shimmered. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "I do." She stepped closer, her heart racing. "Then tell me something honest." He met her gaze, steady. "Okay, what are you afraid of?" He paused, then said, "Of finally being happy and losing it again." She swallowed hard, tears forming. "Then let me say something honest too." "Go ahead," he whispered. "You won't lose me." And before either of them could overthink it, she reached up, resting her hand against his cheek. He didn't move. He didn't need to. Everything he had ever wanted to say lived in that silence between them. Then she kissed him, soft, unhurried, real. Not a scene, not a performance. Just two souls finally meeting where words couldn't reach. When they pulled apart, he smiled, whispering, "You fell asleep on my shoulder once." Maybe that was the universe's way of saying we'd find our way here. She laughed quietly, wiping a tear. "Then I guess I should thank the turbulence." He smiled. "And I'll thank fate." They stood there under the soft glow of the lights, the world forgotten. Somewhere inside, both of them knew that whatever happened next, this moment, this truth, was theirs. It wasn't fame. It wasn't fantasy. It was something much rarer, something real. The moment that changed everything weeks past. But the memory of that night stayed with them both. Not as a secret, not as a rumor, but as something too sacred to name. They went their separate ways for a while, not out of distance, but out of respect for what was growing between them. Keanu returned to filming in Canada, while Sandra focused on her foundation work in Los Angeles. Yet every night, when the world quieted, they thought of each other. The world didn't stop talking. Every interview, every podcast, every fan post mentioned their names together. Keanu and Sandra. The internet called them soulmates. People made videos about their kindness, their patience, their shared silences that spoke louder than words. But what no one knew was that behind all the headlines, they were writing letters to each other. Real letters, written by hand. Keanu wrote first. Sandra. Some people fill the room with noise. You fill it with calm. I didn't realize how much peace felt like love until you sat beside me that night. Wherever you are, I hope the world is gentle with you today. Wrote back a week later. Keanu, you once said truth doesn't need to shout. I'm learning that love doesn't either. It just stays, quietly, like you always do. Letters continued, sometimes short, sometimes pages long. They spoke about loneliness, fame, memories, and little things that reminded them of each other. It wasn't about confessions or promises. It was about connection. One evening, months later, Sandra received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo. It was from the flight, that first day when she fell asleep on his shoulder. Someone from the crew must have taken it. In it, her head rested gently against him, and he was looking out the window, lost in thought. Peaceful. On the back, he had written only one line. Maybe some moments choose us. Her heart ached in the best way. That night, she booked a flight to Vancouver. When she arrived, it was snowing, thick, soft flakes falling over the quiet city. She found him at the edge of a small coffee shop near the harbor, wearing a wool coat, sipping tea alone. He looked up and smiled as if he'd been waiting all along. You came, he said simply. You wrote. She replied. They laughed softly. And then silence took over, the same kind that had always connected them better than words. You look happy, she said. I am, he answered. Seeing you does that. They walked together through the snow-covered streets, their footprints forming twin paths behind them. The air was cold, but neither felt it. You know, she said after a while. For years people have been asking me what kind of love story I believe in. I never knew how to answer, and now, he asked. She smiled. Now I think it's this, to people who didn't plan it, didn't rush it, but still found their way back. He stopped walking and looked at her, snowflakes resting on his hair. Sandra, he said softly, I don't know what tomorrow looks like. I don't know if the world will ever stop talking. But I know this: if I have to choose between silence with you and applause without you, I'll choose silence every time. Her eyes glistened. You already did. They stood there under the falling snow, the world around them fading. It was quiet. It was real. It was theirs. A few weeks later, a photo of them surfaced online again, walking hand in hand through the Vancouver streets, smiling at something no one else could see. The internet went wild, but for once, they didn't care. At a later interview, a reporter asked Sandra, are the rumors true? Are you and Keanu together? She smiled gently and said, some things aren't rumors. They're just real life finally catching up. Keanu, when asked the same question, said quietly, we've been friends for decades. Sometimes friendship is just love that waited patiently. Their love story wasn't a movie. It didn't have a dramatic ending or a grand announcement. It was built on small moments. Falling asleep on a plane, walking in the rain, standing up in silence, writing letters that healed unseen wounds. And in those quiet, imperfect moments, they found what the world spends a lifetime searching for: peace in another person. On a warm evening months later, they visited the same charity hospital in Tokyo where it had all started. The little girl they met before ran up to them, smiling, holding a new drawing. Look, she said, handing it to Keanu. It's both of you this time. He knelt beside her. Who are we in the picture? The girl giggled. You're the superheroes who save people with kindness. He looked at Sandra, who smiled through tears. She's not wrong, Sandra said. He squeezed her hand gently. No, she isn't. As they left the hospital, the sun was setting. The sky glowed gold, the same color as that first day on the plane. And as Sandra leaned her head on his shoulder once more, Keanu whispered, almost to himself, maybe some journeys don't end. They just change their destination. And in that soft, infinite moment, it was clear. They were no longer just traveling together. They had arrived.